Excuse me, sir. This lounge is for authorized passengers only. The voice came sharp, cold, and twice as loud as it needed to be. Steve Beckham, a man in his late 50s with silver-streaked hair and deep smile lines, turned slowly from the coffee machine, a paper cup in hand. He wore an old checkered shirt, jeans faded from years of honest use, and a pair of running shoes that had seen more miles than most luxury cars. He looked puzzled. "Is there a problem?" he asked politely. The woman at the reception desk didn't flinch. She scanned him again, eyes darting across his clothes, his scuffed bag, and the absence of anything flashy. "Can I see your invitation code, sir?" Steve set the cup down. "Sure. I'm on the Beckham family manifest. Flight B-23. Private jet to Geneva." He opened his phone, pulling up the boarding email. David made the booking himself. "I'm flying ahead for the Children of the Future Gala." The woman frowned as she glanced at the screen. "And you are?" "Steve Beckham," he said with a nod. "David's older brother." There was a pause, the kind that freezes the air between people. Then a stifled laugh escaped from behind the desk. "You're David Beckham's brother?" she asked, half in disbelief, half in sarcasm. Her colleague leaned over to take a look, subtly shaking his head. Steve felt the temperature in the room shift. "Is something funny?" "It's just, no offense, sir," she said, tapping her keyboard. "We were told that this flight is exclusively for family members. You don't have a security tag, your ID doesn't match any VIP listing, and I don't see any Beckham resemblance." Another staff member, a tall man in a tight black vest, stepped in. "Sir, can you please step aside while we clarify this? There may have been a mistake in the manifest." Steve blinked. "Mistake? Just a protocol check, sir." "Look," Steve said calmly, holding out his ID. "My passport has my name. The ticket is under the same name. The confirmation email is from Beckham Holdings. My brother booked this seat for me personally." The man barely looked at it. "We're going to need more than that. Do you have any photo verification? Any image of you with Mr. Beckham?" Steve hesitated. "Not on this phone. My main phone is charging at home. I took this backup just for travel. But you can call his assistant. Or just wait for David, he's arriving after me." The woman scoffed. "Sir, we can't simply take someone's word based on a name and an email. You'd be surprised how often people pretend to be celebrities' relatives to get into private flights. And you'd be surprised," Steve said evenly, "how little the people who actually know celebrities care about being treated like one." A moment of tension hung between them. "Please," Steve continued, "I just want to board on time." David arranged everything. The man sighed and tapped his earpiece. "Control, we have a possible impersonation attempt at Gate 5. Requesting supervisor presence." Steve felt the knot in his chest tighten. He had grown up alongside David. They shared bunk beds as kids, Sunday dinners, late-night calls. But while David's life soared into the realm of global fame, Steve chose simplicity. A life far from the cameras. No entourage. No designer clothes. Just loyalty and family. And now, that very choice was being used against him. He looked around. The luxury lounge buzzed with discreet opulence. Leather armchairs, gold-trimmed curtains, free champagne. And in the middle of it stood a man whose only crime was dressing like a regular human being. The supervisor arrived. Yeah, impeccably dressed. Clipboard in hand, authority in his eyes. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm told there's some confusion regarding your access." "No confusion," Steve replied. "I'm Steve Beckham. My brother booked this flight. I'm on the passenger list." The supervisor flipped through his papers. "You're not on the primary manifest." Steve leaned forward. "I was added last minute. My brother's assistant Lucy handled it. Check the secondary entries or call her." "We will," the supervisor said, but his voice was not convinced. "In the meantime, we'd ask that you vacate the lounge area until your credentials can be verified." Someone behind the counter whispered, "Maybe he's just a fan who guessed the flight." Steve heard it, loud and clear. He sighed. "You really think I'd go this far to sneak onto a plane my brother owns?" The woman at the counter folded her arms. "It's happened before." Steve's patience was fraying. "Do you even know what this flight is for?" "Yes," the supervisor replied. "It's for the Beckham Foundation's annual gala. High-level donors, partners, family." "Exactly," Steve said. "And I've been at every single one since it started." The supervisor tapped his pen. Still without hard verification. "I don't want a drink. I don't need special treatment," Steve interrupted. "I just want to be treated like someone telling the truth." The supervisor turned away to make a call. Steve stood there exposed. He felt like a trespasser in a world where surname alone wasn't enough unless you looked the part. Nearby, a man in designer sunglasses and a sparkling watch walked through without so much as a glance at the counter. The receptionist smiled at him warmly. Steve watched, and something in him quietly broke. Minutes passed. Then 20, 30. No updates. No calls returned. He checked his phone. 1 bar of signal. No reply from Lucy. He sat in the corner, bags beside him, ignored. Then, with a deep breath, he typed one short message. "Hey Dave, they won't let me on. Think I'm some random guy. Can you sort this out?" He hit send. A single check mark. No reply. Until 3 minutes later. "On my way." Steve closed his eyes. He knew what that meant. Not just, "I'll fix this," but, "No one gets to humiliate my family while I'm breathing." The waiting lounge of the private terminal was supposed to be a place of calm. Plush chairs, soft lighting, complimentary champagne. But for Steve Beckham, it had become a silent courtroom. He sat alone in a high-backed leather chair, flanked by 2 security personnel who avoided his eyes. They hadn't handcuffed him, hadn't even touched him. But the unspoken judgment was heavier than steel. He could still hear the airport coordinator's voice from earlier, sharp, formal, laced with disbelief. "I'm sorry, Mr. Beckham. There must be a mistake. This aircraft is reserved for the Beckham family only." "I am family," Steve had said, trying to stay calm. "David's my brother. I'm supposed to board." Pause. A look. The kind that evaluates your shoes, your posture, your accent. "We'll need to verify that with Mr. Beckham himself." And just like that, he was no longer a guest. He was a problem. They hadn't shouted. They hadn't accused him of anything illegal. But they'd done something worse. They'd looked right at him and decided he didn't belong. That he couldn't possibly be part of that Beckham family. Steve had grown used to the shadows. As David's older brother, he'd chosen a quieter life. A modest home in Manchester. A small business. No press, no autographs. But there had always been pride, quiet pride, in David's success. And David had always made sure Steve knew, "You matter." Always. But today none of that mattered. Not his last name. Not his calm explanations. Not even the printed confirmation email on his phone. The staff took one glance at him, middle-aged, dressed in simple trousers and a jumper, and assumed he was mistaken. Or lying. He remembered the young male attendant, Luke maybe, who had first scanned the guest manifest. "This list says Beckham party, 5 seats reserved. But it's been used exclusively for immediate family. Sir, we've had imposters before. You understand?" Imposters. That word hit harder than he'd expected. He had wanted to pull out his phone, call David immediately. But it wasn't his style to escalate. He didn't want to seem entitled. So instead he said, "Please just double-check." The email confirmation was sent from Beckham Holdings. The ticket was arranged directly through their office. Luke had hesitated. Then walked away to consult with management. 20 minutes had passed since then. Now Steve sat quietly, the sounds of airport life muffled behind glass. A jet taxied outside. Through the window he could see the aircraft waiting, the Beckham jet. Sleek, black, custom-tailored. Waiting for the wrong people, apparently. His fingers tapped against his leg unconsciously. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was tired. Tired of being invisible in a world that only saw flash. Then came the whispering. Behind the glass wall of the staff corridor, a few airport employees had started to gather. One of them, an older woman with silver hair and a tight bun, held a walkie-talkie pressed to her ear. Another stared out toward the driveway, eyes wide. And then everything changed. A black SUV pulled up. It didn't screech. It didn't announce itself. But the energy in the room shifted instantly. Even before the door opened, they all knew. David Beckham stepped out. He wasn't wearing anything flashy. Just black jeans, a navy t-shirt, sunglasses. No entourage. No PR team. Just him. But the way he walked, it was calm. Controlled. And each step seemed to ask, who made the mistake? Inside the lounge, staff scattered. The silver-haired woman straightened her blazer. Luke, the young man, froze in place. David entered without a word. His eyes scanned the room once, then landed on Steve. And then, something happened that no one expected. He smiled. Not the smile for cameras. Not the commercial one. A real one. He walked straight to Steve, leaned down, and pulled him into a firm hug. "Sorry I'm late," David whispered. Steve chuckled bitterly. "You're not. I've been detained." David straightened, turned to the staff. "Who's in charge here?" The silver-haired woman stepped forward, trembling slightly. I am Mr. Beckham. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. David held up a hand. No. There's been a judgment, he said, voice low but sharp. And I'd like to know why my brother, who had every right to board our plane, was treated like an intruder. Luke stammered, Sir, the manifest listed Beckham family, and we've had people try to board before using false claims. David turned to him. And so you assumed? Without asking me? Without calling my team? Without verifying the booking number? No, sir. Yes, sir. David took a breath. My brother doesn't carry my fame. That doesn't mean he carries less worth. Silence. Everyone held their breath. I'm not here to make a scene, David said. I just want you to remember this moment. Not for who I am, but for what it says about how you treat people you think are nobodies. The silver-haired woman stepped closer. Mr. Beckham, we truly apologize. We'll ensure this never happens again. Please, let us escort you both to the aircraft. David looked at Steve. You ready? Steve nodded slowly. But as they began to move, David stopped. Then he turned back. To be clear, he said, no one is losing their job over this. Not today. Luke looked up, surprised. David added, but there will be retraining. And I expect a written apology sent to my brother's address. The silver-haired woman nodded quickly. Of course, Mr. Beckham. As they walked out, Steve leaned in and muttered, You didn't have to do all that. David smiled. Yes, I did. They boarded the jet. The door closed. The cabin was cool, quiet. Steve sat down, took a breath, and let his shoulders drop. David sat across from him and pulled off his sunglasses. You all right? He asked. Steve nodded. Better now. Good, David said. Because we're not done yet. Steve raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? David replied, we're going to make sure no one else ever feels the way you did today. Not on my watch. Steve smiled, tired but grateful. And as the engines began to rumble, he realized something. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been quietly pushed aside. But not anymore. The roar of the engines was distant, muffled behind layers of tinted glass and soft leather. Inside the private jet, the cabin was quiet. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that followed something meaningful. David and Steve sat across from each other, both sipping water, the silence between them filled with things that didn't need to be said. Steve stared out the window, watching the clouds shift like slow waves. His mind replayed everything, being pulled aside, questioned, doubted, judged. And then David showing up. Not with noise. Not with demands. But with quiet, calm power. With a presence that silenced the room without lifting his voice. You really dropped everything, Steve finally said, voice low. David shrugged. You're my brother. I didn't drop everything. I picked up what mattered. Steve smiled just a little. You had a sponsor meeting in Milan. I saw it on your schedule. David leaned back in his seat, eyes calm. That can wait. Respect can't. There was something deeper in that moment than just brotherhood. Something about legacy. About what people remembered, not the fame, not the wealth, but the way someone stood up when it counted. Honestly, Steve said, I didn't expect you to come in person. David chuckled. Neither did the staff, clearly. They both laughed. A little humor broke the weight in the cabin. Steve looked down at his hands. I wasn't mad they didn't recognize me. I get it, I'm not you. I'm not famous. But what stung was how fast they decided I didn't belong. Like I was a mistake. David nodded slowly. That's what I hate most. Not the lack of recognition. The lack of curiosity. Of humanity. There was a pause. Then Steve asked, Have you ever felt that? David raised his eyebrows. More than you'd think. Different reasons, different settings. You can be loved by millions, but still be underestimated by one airport clerk, one executive, one stranger in a suit. The jet leveled out. A stewardess approached, offering coffee or tea. David politely declined. Steve asked for tea, chamomile, just to steady his nerves. She returned moments later with a steaming cup and a quiet smile, the kind that came with knowing who sat in that cabin. David broke the silence again. You know why I told them not to fire her? Steve nodded. Because firing her doesn't undo what happened. Exactly, David said. It's easy to make someone a scapegoat. But if all they learn is fear, nothing changes. I'd rather she feel the weight of what she almost destroyed, and grow from it. Steve took a sip of tea. Still, it must have been tempting to go full Beckham mode on them. David laughed softly. You mean pull out the World Cup medals and threaten to call the press? Something like that. David looked serious again. Nah, that's not power. That's ego. Real power is walking in, quiet, steady, and making people rethink everything, with just your presence. Steve nodded. You did that. But David shook his head. You did that. I just reminded them of it. The jet flew smooth over the French countryside now. Sunlight painted the clouds with a golden hue. A silence settled again, this time peaceful. Then Steve asked the question he'd been holding. Why do you even keep me out of the spotlight? I mean, you could have introduced me in interviews, brought me to galas, let the world know I'm your brother. But you didn't. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His expression was earnest. Because I didn't want the world to know you as my brother, he said. I wanted them to know you as you. Quiet, humble, brilliant in your own way. You don't need my shadow. You've got your own light. Steve blinked. No one had ever said that to him. Not like that. You've always protected me, he said. David smiled. I didn't protect you today. You protected yourself. You didn't yell. You didn't snap. You stayed calm even when they didn't treat you right. That takes strength. Steve looked away, touched. Still felt small though. We all do, David said. Even me. Another pause. Then David pulled out his phone, opened a messaging app, and tapped quickly. What are you doing? Steve asked. Sending a note to Lucy. Telling her we're canceling the gala in Madrid. Steve sat up. Wait, what? That's tonight. You're the guest of honor. David nodded. And you're more important. David? No. No events tonight. Instead, we're going to that little pub in East London you used to take me to after matches. Just the two of us. Fish and chips, bad darts, worse music. Steve laughed. You sure? Press will wonder where you are. They can wonder, David said. Let them wonder what it means when a man skips the spotlight to sit quietly with his brother. The plane began its descent. Back at the airport, staff had received a memo, directly from Beckham's office. A quiet warning, a humble reminder. Everyone who walks through those VIP gates deserves to be treated with dignity. Not just the ones with famous last names. As the jet touched down and rolled gently along the runway, Steve looked over at his younger brother. Once a kid with a dream, now a man who changed rooms just by entering them. You know, he said, I used to worry people would never take me seriously unless I had your name behind me. David tilted his head. And now I realize it's not about names. It's about actions. It's about who shows up. And today you showed up. Not for cameras. Not for fans. For me. David nodded, and for a moment the emotion was too thick for words. As they stepped off the plane, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the tarmac. There were no reporters. No crowd. Just two brothers walking side by side. Equal. Respected. See. And as they entered the car waiting for them, Steve turned back one last time to the aircraft. Not as a man who was questioned, but as a man who was finally acknowledged. Sometimes the flight isn't the real journey. It's what happens before and after that takes you the farthest.